Hey there folks. So previously we've experimented with some PCG and we've put things like, having these trees growing out of all these different hilled areas. But what happens if we actually start having some really kind of steep hills? What if we don't actually want trees to be growing out of that? What if we don't want grass to be growing up the side of a hill, maybe only on the top? Well, you can see here I've created a bit of a kind of bumpy landscaped area. So I've just gone into the landscape tool, I've used sculpt and smooth, and I've just tried to kind of represent a couple of different kind of gradients. So you can see we've got some very steep gradients over here. We've got some nice flat areas on top. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of my already existing PCG areas. So I'm going to take this one that's just kind of filtering out some ground cover and plants here, and I'm going to put it onto there. And what you can see is the first issue I have is it's only spawning inside of that volume. So I could go and scale this. I prefer not to scale them from here. I prefer to go to the brush settings and just drag them out myself. But you can see if I make this just that little bit bigger, so scale this out, give it a bit of height as well. So this will update. Obviously it's updating the PCG as we go there. You can see now it includes every single surface. And I've got plants that are growing on the really, really steep surface. I've not set it to have on these plants. And this is why I've done this with the flowers. I've not set the flowers to have a directly kind of upward facing rotation, because if I did that, because they're so wide on their base, they're actually going to look like some of the plants on the outside are going to be growing just out of thin air. So at least by turning them into the angle, we can look at what is a natural angle for those flowers and those plants to go up. And I think over here, this is definitely not a natural angle for them. Okay, so we've got this. Let's start having a look at how we can now start filtering based on the actual kind of gradient of the surface itself. Now I'm inside of this PCG system here, and you can see I'm just debugging the surface sampler just for now, so you can see all the points that are appearing all over this surface. We can see that they've obviously got a noise value going from 0 through to 1, and it's scattered uniformly across everything. And if I plug this in, you can obviously see that's what's creating the ground cover, the plants, the flowers, and everything like that. Now, to be able to get all of this, what I've done is I've used a named reroute declaration node. So named reroute declaration node, you can see I can add one in, and I've resaved it as ground cover points. And that is what I'm using over here to spawn. But before I get to these spawns, I want to start filtering off the things that are appearing, or the points that are appearing on the kind of really steep surfaces. So before I go into the ground cover thing here, I want to start doing some extra checks and extra kind of operations. The one we're going to use is a normal to density. Now normal takes the angle of the surface. So think of this, if you look at the normal, we've got 0, 0 on the X and the Y. So we're not looking for the actual horizontal, forward and backward kind of pointing. We're looking for positive, so upward facing normal. So facing up on the Z axis, we're looking at 1 being up, -1 would be down. So I'm looking at things that match to that. And if I just debug this one, I have to just turn off this debugger here, you can see that everything has now gone white. Not quite everything. I have this very dark little gap here where things are starting to get a little bit darker. And that's because that is quite a steep surface. So if we come into here and start having a look at the normal to density options, the strength, we just drop that strength just a little bit, drop it to 0.8, we can see that dark patch is actually going to grow. Let's drop it down to 0.2, and you can see that is giving me quite a strong thing from the really steep area here, which is black, with this fall off down to the white, light grey areas on the very flat surface. So it's taking into account the gradient of the surface, and it's using that to create that kind of density map for me. Okay, so that's useful. Let's move this along. And I can, in that normal to density, I can also change the offset. So it can go from, this 0, think about where the transition between the two is happening. If I increase this value, you can see it's going to go all the way down. So it favors the one area. Go to 0.5, actually 0.1. There you go. I can move it closer to the dark. So I'm moving the transition area. Or I can go the opposite way. So if I go minus 0.02, minus 0.03, I can keep on just pushing that offset up higher and higher. So I'll leave that at 0, but know that you can do that. So if you want to have just a bit more control to push it down the side or push it back up, you can do. But now that we've got all this, what happens if I actually plug this into my ground cover points? Well, I'm going to end up with purple flowers on the flat areas. I'm going to end up with ground cover on pretty much most of the surfaces, and then on the really steep bits where it's black, I'm going to end up with these plants. And that's because these systems over here are being told to density filter based on 0 to 1, but based on this normal density here. Yeah, and the normal density is obviously mapping white at the top and grey and black on the sides. So how do we take this and now start using it so we only make the flowers and the ground cover appear on the flat areas? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to use a density filter, and that density filter is going to be useful for us to basically say, all right, where do I actually want these things to appear? If I was to debug and just show this as default, 0.5 to 1, you can see I've cut out all of the dark grey and black areas, and I've now only got points where it's obviously on this gradient. And I can still see there's some dark grey areas, so you can push this up a little bit if you want. 0.7 there pushes it up, and now I've only really got the ground cover happening on the top flat areas. Okay, so let's try and put that in there. Well, it's better. We don't have all the stuff on the side, but now we've only got purple flowers all the way around. And that's because, again, if we go back and look at what the actual noise density thing is here, all of them are very much white. And if we think about it, 0.7 to 1, 0.9 to 1 of that is the purple flowers, which means 0.7 to 0.9 is that kind of ground cover bit around the outside. And that's why we get this little ring here of 0.7 to 0.9 areas. So how do we take this and take that a little bit further? We want to get back to having only these bits on top, but having them really noisy. Well, for that one, we're looking for something called a density noise, or just search for noise. You'll see there's attribute noise and density noise. I'm going to add in a density noise, but you'll see it'll come up as an attribute noise. And if I plug this in and connect it, and then make sure we obviously turn off that debug, you can see what that's going to do is it's going to take the density of the previous points that are going to come in, and it's going to output those, but we're now going to reset them to be between the values of 0 and 1. So now I've got all this kind of density noise applied to it. I can plug it back into here, turn off this debug, and I've got the exact same thing that I had over here with, like scattering all over the floor, but I only have that scattering on the very flat surfaces. I don't have things growing out of the sides of the hill. And that's going to be useful for me because I can obviously use my landscape terrain materials now to make this a bit more rocky. And I could obviously just have maybe a couple of rocks or something coming out here, because here we're using this density filter at 0.7 to 1. But you could come out here and have another density filter, and this one could be 0 through to 0.7. And essentially this is slope. Yeah, if I debug this, this is the slope points, and this is the top level points. So lots of things that we can do with that, but it's very useful to be able to just get things that are facing upwards, things that are flat. And if you do have any really kind of steep areas, you can now start using this to cut those out. And you can think back obviously over here, could we come back over here and start implementing this into our forest so that we can make sure that we don't have any trees that are growing out of the side of any kind of steep hills? Maybe we have more rocks and pebbles and scatter like that on the side of these, and then we only have plant and ground coverage happening where there is obviously a flat surface for them to grow on. Thanks for watching, folks. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider subscribing to access more of my Unreal Engine content.